Hey guys, tonight we journey back to ancient China 2,000 years ago. Give or take a century where silk flows through your fingers like moonlight, and even your socks are steeped in philosophy. You're standing in a quiet courtyard at dawn, surrounded by dew-dappled mulberry trees. A chorus of soft-footed footsteps echo from within stone corridors, the only sound louder than the click of your own straw sandals. You've been summoned to the weaving house of the Han Dynasty. It's not for punishment, not for glory, but to learn the proper way to fold a sock. You probably won't survive this job if you're hoping for excitement. There are no wild battles or steamy court intrigues here, just a lot of categorizing. But somehow, that's what makes it all the more hypnotic. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts, as many stories in the Han do, with a worm. A silkworm, to be precise, contentedly, munching on mulberry leaves in a lacquered box, oblivious to its future as imperial footwear. You watch one curl up, spin its silk cocoon, nap for several quiet days, frankly. Not a bad metaphor for tonight's journey. In the Han Dynasty, socks weren't just functional, they were a quiet declaration. Silk, spun by the diligent hands of women and children, was the primary material for the well-to-do. The average peasant wore socks made of hemp or coarse cotton, if they wore any at all. But you're an assistant to a minor official in the imperial archives, squarely middle-tier, sockwies. Your pair, freshly stitched yesterday, gleams a soft cream. The silk is uneven in places, one heel tighter than the other. Not that anyone will notice, unless, of course, someone does. Han etiquette is a precision game, and your superior is the sort of man who notices whether your socks wrinkle at the instep. You slip them on right foot first, for know and take a moment to smooth the ankle wraps. They're cut to wrap in a specific direction, clockwise, as dictated by your local Confucian manual. Not because anyone believes clockwise wrapping is sacred necessarily, but because deviation from norm signals moral laziness. And in Han China, moral laziness is the gateway drug to political instability. It's early morning in the sock quarter of Chang'an, and already the air smells faintly of indigo mostly. Dyers carry baskets on poles, socks hanging in bundles from each end like lazy bats. You watch a boy skip down an alley, a mismatched pair flapping like flags from his belt. His mother will not be pleased. Silkworms, though blind and mostly legless, were national treasures. Each cocoon unraveled yielded nearly a mile of thread, and spinning them into sock-weight silk was delicate business. Artisans often worked in hushed groups, murmuring poetry to keep rhythm. One account even, if apocryphal, claims that an elderly spinner named Shen once whispered the entirety of the Book of Songs to every cocoon she spun, resulting in unnervingly symmetrical socks. Historians still argue whether Shen was real or just a metaphor for idealized labor. You pass the weaving hall where master loomers are at work. The clack of bamboo frames is soothing, almost musical. An elderly woman sees you loitering and shoos you away with a glance. You are not yet sock-worthy in her eyes. That's fair. You've only been here a month. And your last attempt at pairing socks by status ended with a merchantess foot trap being accidentally delivered to a regional governor. It did not go over well. Your mind drifts briefly to the imperial court. It said the emperor owns 1,000 pairs of socks, each categorized by occasion. Formal ritual socks dark with embroidered cranes. Hunting socks thick-soled for stirrup wear. And the infamous dream socks stitched with silk, harvested under moonlight, and worn only on nights of lunar eclipse. There's no way to confirm that last one. But it's the kind of detail a palace record keeper might slip into the margins after a third cup of rice wine. As you make your way to the archive storeroom, you pass an outdoor laundry platform where rows of wet socks hang like silent scrolls. A servant is gently brushing a stain from one. Another is tying tiny reed tags to each pair, white for administrators, green for scholars, brown for accountants. You pause to watch. It's strangely satisfying, as the socks themselves vary. Some have separate toe compartments, like primitive tabi. Others are single-pocketed, meant for soft slippers or padded sandals. The most expensive are double-layered, stitched with hidden quotes from Confucian texts. Why? So even your toes can reflect on virtue. You crouch to tighten your own laces. Your boss, Master Liu, appears from around the corner holding a lacquered box. Inside are 6 pairs of freshly delivered socks from the Weaving Guild. Sort these by status and season, he says, not unkindly. Then deliver the winter pairs to the outer office before noon. And mind the stitching. There's a rogue hemstress making left socks slightly larger. You nod. It wouldn't be the first time, so you begin. Handling each sock like a scroll, inspecting weave tightness, embroidery motifs, and toe alignment. Each detail whispers its own story. One pair is pale green silk with plum blossoms embroidered at the ankle. For a mid-ranking official's spring formal wear, probably. Another is beige with faint yellow stripes, likely for summer leisure. And then there's the odd pair. Black socks stitched in tight chevron patterns, the weave almost too fine. You squint. These might belong to the legal office or an assassin. You put them aside just in case. A soft bell rings outside mid-morning. Breeze drifts through the open window, bringing with it the scent of boiled rice and sandalwood. You sigh. There's still a whole box of socks to go. But something about the rhythm of it, the slow, thoughtful sorting, makes it feel less like a chore and more like a ritual. The silkworms have done their part. Now it's your turn. Your fingers move more easily now, the fabric flowing like water through your hands. The thing about Confucius is he never once mentions socks, not even in passing. No poetic musings on the dignity of well-covered ankles, no odes to symmetrical foot coverings. And yet somehow His ideas managed to weave themselves into every fiber of Han footwear culture. As you hold a neatly stitched pair of ankle socks up to the light, it hits you. There's no imperial law dictating how socks should be sorted. And yet everyone, from street cobblers to palace scribes, just knows that red is too bold for scholars, that you mustn't wear patterned heels on days honoring ancestors, and that your left sock must always reflect Ren, compassion, if it's wrapped a little too tight. It's all unwritten code, absorbed like tea into rice paper. Sit cross-legged on the floor, the lacquered box open beside you, as Master Lu's latest sock shipment waits for its moral evaluation. Confucianism in Han China isn't just a philosophy, it's a system of cosmic alignment. Every act, every object, every little thread of life is supposed to harmonize with the larger order. Socks, you're learning, are no exception. Colors, for instance, aren't just aesthetic choices. They're declarations of virtue, intention, and place in the hierarchy. Pale yellow suggests humility. Gray whispers bureaucratic modesty. Red shouts. It's usually reserved for rituals or elite weddings. Of course, some brave soul tried to wear crimson ankle wraps to a minor treasury audit. Legend says his ankles sweated from embarrassment.
Adios.
You smooth out a pair of cream-colored socks, noting the stitch count. 6 rows along the ankle, symmetrical seam at the heel, a subtle embroidered swirl just at the cuff, probably a visual pun. Something clever like a cloud suggesting elevation of the soul, or maybe it just looks nice. Historians still argue whether these little motifs were coded moral lessons or decorative whimsy. Outside you hear the wooden rattle of a street vendor passing by, calling out for old robes and scraps. His cart creaks with cast-offs, and you wonder how many improper socks have ended their days like that, sold off for a few coins forgotten by history. And yet here you are, treating each pair as though it holds the secrets of the universe. Your fingers trace a particularly luxurious pair dyed deep indigo and lined with soft bamboo fiber. Definitely for someone important. You can tell by the delicate phoenix motif stitched near the ankle small. It's almost hidden, a sign of nobility modest enough not to flaunt it. You're tempted to try them on just once. But you remember that story about the clerk who wore a nobleman's sock just to feel its softness. He slipped on the polished floor and twisted his ankle. Some say the sock was cursed. Others say the universe was simply reasserting its proper balance. Master Leo reappears, a scroll in hand. "You're not aligning by solar cycle, are you?" he asks with raised brows. You blink eye. "Wasn't told to." He sighs. "Even months must be in order. These are for winter. Pale colors disturb Ki in cold months." You nod solemnly, because when someone invokes QI, it's best not to argue. You begin reshuffling the box against pring tones to the left, earth tones to the center, darker hues for the cold season. It's a slow process, meditative even, and strangely calming. You glance at a pair of socks with unusually long ankle flaps. These are summer wear, designed to fold low over the heel and wick sweat. There's a faint stitched character jing, meaning quietude, appropriate, given the heat-induced stillness they were meant for. It's also said, though the records are fuzzy on this, that the philosopher Dong Zhongshu, one of Confucianism's biggest Han-era fans, once refused to speak to a visitor whose socks were misaligned. A humble mistake, perhaps, or a profound metaphor for an internal moral disorder. Scholars still debate whether the entire encounter even happened. But among sock archivists, it's basically gospel. You pause to sip a little warm barley tea. The liquid tastes faintly smoky, and the ceramic cup warms your fingers. Outside, the sun rises higher, casting faint shadows over the sorting table. It's time to inspect the hems. The Han seamstress, you've noticed, leaves clues behind in her thread tension. Looser stitches, possibly a rush job, tighter seams. They're a perfectionist or someone very anxious. You handle one sock coarse cotton, dyed a dull brown, with a deliberately imperfect stitch at the heel. Ah, this is probably a scholar's sock. Deliberate imperfection, after all, was a hallmark of literati taste. Too much symmetry, they believed, was vulgar. You smirk. Imagine writing poetry about your own sock seam. Actually, don't imagine. It probably did happen. A soft knock signals the delivery boy. He's here to take the sorted pairs back to the offices. You carefully lift the box and hand it over, watching as he balances it with practiced ease and vanishes down the corridor, his own socks slightly frayed at the edges. You wince. Hopefully Master Liu won't notice. Left alone again, you sort through the reject pile. A few socks don't quite fit any category. This one's a strange length. That one's got an embroidered duck where a crane should be. You place them in a maybe pile, which has slowly grown since your first week. One day perhaps there'll be a special drawer for such moral anomalies. You finish refolding the last few winter pairs, smoothing the fabric one final time, tucking in loose threads. The box is empty now. Outside, the midday bell tolls. You stretch back, cracking faintly, and glance down at your own socks. Still neat. Still properly aligned. You might not be a sage or an official, or even a skilled tailor. But you know the moral order of footwear. And in this little corner of the world, that counts for something. You've barely finished your barley tea when Master Liu reappears, this time flanked by a young palace attendant carrying a lacquered chest nearly as big as he is. "They've sent us the laundry list," Liu says dryly, motioning for the chest to be placed before you. The words sound harmless enough. But you've learned that when Liu says laundry list, it means one thing: hierarchy, and not the casual, polite kind. No, this is the type of sock list that determines which minor noble gets to insult which accountant. Inside the chest are dozens, hundreds of socks bundled in silk sashes and tied with reed tags. It smells faintly of jasmine and vinegar, the traditional soak for fine silks. You breathe in slowly and brace yourself. This is the great unspoken truth of the Han Dynasty. Laundry is political. You start with a pair tagged for the Bureau of Court Music, pale blue with embroidered cloud patterns near the cuff. That tracks. Musicians were considered conduits of cosmic harmony, and their wardrobe had to reflect that. Even their socks were dyed with sky ink, a specific blend of woad and rice wine. They smell faintly of mildew and prestige. Then you find a bundle labeled Outer Palace Guard, South Wing, Mid-Rank. These are thicker, woven with hemp and lined with coarse silk at the toe. Practical, slightly singed at one-edge training drills with fire arrows, maybe. Or someone got too close to the incense again. You file them under military winter wear and move on. The chest is a sock mosaic. Floral motifs, geometric hems, seasonal tassels, even a few with stitched characters on the soles. That last group is particularly tricky. Some show names, others cryptic messages. One reads, asterisk endure and re-hit. You blink. Could be a metaphor. Could be someone misused the embroidery kit after a breakup. Each pair must be sorted according to social status. Rank within that status, intended occasion, season, and any Confucian implications, not to mention size. Yes, Han, laundry servants were expected to sort socks by foot size, which had its own implications. You spot a pair that breaks protocol entirely, bright maroon with a silver border. Silver is a problematic color in Han dress. It's not technically banned, but it hints at Taoist associations, sometimes seen as spiritually rebellious. Master Liu leans over your shoulder, frowns at them, and simply says, "Poet." You nod. Poets were always pushing boundaries, especially foot boundaries. You return to the socks of the inner court, more finely made, with fewer stains. Some have inner linings stitched with aphorisms, little moral reminders pressed against the sole. Asterisk step with virtue, walk in harmony. One simply says, don't trip. You smirk at that. Someone had a sense of humor. Outside, you hear distant chanting, possibly from a temple beyond the market walls. You pause, sock in hand, and listen for a moment. The rhythms mirror your own sorting pattern. Fold, stack, tag, breathe. Again, it becomes meditative. Then you find a pair that truly tests you. Cream-colored, almost white, with no pattern, no stitching, and no tag. The thread is slightly thinner than standard issue. Could be for a eunuch, maybe a high-ranking scribe. You hold it up to the light. There's a faint sheen moon-dyed silk, perhaps. Rare. Extremely rare. You set it gently aside in a place of honor, just in case someone comes looking. The next bundle brings you back down to earth. 5 mismatched socks tied together with a note that reads simply asterisk from laundry building. See, probably someone. Important, you sigh. Someone's about to get demoted for this. In the Han bureaucracy, laundry mishaps weren't just embarrassing, they were dangerous. A misplaced garment could be interpreted as subversion, even espionage. There's an old story about a courtier who accidentally wore socks embroidered with the emperor's personal dragon motif. He claimed ignorance. He was reassigned to agricultural tax inspection in a swamp province. Historians still argue whether these incidents were actually punished harshly, or whether the threat of sock-based demotion was mostly a form of social control. Either way, you're not taking any chances. The socks from laundry CR triple-checked and re-tagged with the most neutral guess you can muster. Asterisk possible treasury aid. It's non-ceremonial. Asterisks. You reach a final, smaller box tucked beneath the others. These are children's socks. Smaller, softer, often made with wool or layered cotton. Many are faded, worn at the heel. Few are bright and new gifts, probably for noble births. One pair catches your eye immediately. Red silk stitched with a white tiger on one foot and a turtle on the other. Auspicious beasts of protection. A wish for the child to grow brave and wise. Somewhere in this box is a sock you recognize. You'd seen it before weeks ago in another chest. A tiny brown one with a crooked hem and a stitched star on the toe. You remember it because you'd restitched that hem yourself, quietly after hours. It's here, again's, still slightly crooked, still humble, probably destined for some bureaucrat's second son. You smile. Your handiwork, humble as it was, has survived another cycle. The palace attendant returns with a new list, eyes wide as he takes in the room filled with categorized piles. These are actually in order? He asks, like that's a first. You nod slowly. Mostly. Don't mix the music bureau with the tax clerks. Trust me. He gives you a small bow of appreciation and starts carefully boxing the pairs. You watch him, quietly satisfied. You're no sage, no general, no poet. But in this room, among these threads, you bring order to chaos, and honestly, it's kind of everything. You return to your corner with a sense of quiet triumph until you see it. A new bundle has appeared in your workspace, deposited by someone too cowardly to announce themselves. It's loosely tied with twine, no reed tag in sight. You peer inside and immediately feel your pulse quicken. The socks are yellow, bright yellow, like the petals of a marigold soaked in sunshine and audacity. Now, here's the thing. In the Han Dynasty, yellow isn't just a color, it's a declaration. It's the imperial color worn exclusively by the emperor, his direct relatives, and occasionally someone with a truly alarming disregard for protocol. Yellow meant center, associated with earth and the five-element system. It symbolized stability, harmony, and absolute authority. You gently lift one of the socks from the bundle. The silk is flawless, the embroidery nearly invisible, so fine it's like the threads were whispered into existence. A small character rests near the toe, Zhang meaning loyalty. You hold your breath. Wearing yellow socks without permission was a deeply unwise choice. Even officials who qualified for limited yellow accents tended to shy away from them. A minor misstep in sock color could be interpreted as presumption. And presumption, in a Confucian bureaucracy, is like whispering revolution with your feet. You sit down slowly, placing the socks on your lap. They are warm, recently handled. Whoever delivered these either made a mistake or they're making a statement. You remember an old story Master Liu told you your first week about a low-level scribe who wore saffron-trimmed socks during a court ceremony? He claimed it was accidental. The dye had run, he said. No one believed him. Spent the next 3 years copying tax records for donkey owners. In triplicate. Historians still argue whether this cautionary tale was true or just another workplace myth meant to scare junior staff into submission. but the anxiety it produces is very real. You examine the socks more closely. The heel stitching is curved in a particular way, almost identical to a ceremonial we've used in early spring rituals. You've only seen it once before, in a scroll of state garments reserved for ancestral offerings. The possibility dawns on you. These might not be for daily wear at all. It could be ritual socks. Still, you don't want to take chances. You fetch a clean piece of parchment, ink your brush, and start a quiet inquiry memo. Subject: unmarked yellow silk footwear. Possible ritual garments. You include no speculation. It's just the facts, described as plainly as possible, and the observation that these arrived without a tag. You sign it simply as sock archivist assistant. Modesty is best when dealing with potential treason. As you set the memo aside to dry, another servant pokes her head in. You recognize Herme from the office that catalogs palace ritual items. She eyes the yellow socks and lets out a low whistle. "Those yours?" you snort. "Do I look like someone with divine right?" She grins, steps in, and picks up one sock with her pinky finger, as if it might bite. Definitely ritual. Spring equinox, probably. We've got matching ankle wraps with the same stitching pattern in Archive Room B. You let out a slow breath of relief. Not sedition. Just ceremony. Still May warns you to store them properly. Silk above the waist, pattern outward, heel facing the nearest east-facing wall. You thank her and carefully place the socks in a high drawer lined with mulberry paper. It's odd how ceremonial logic creeps into the smallest things. Even laundry, even how you place socks in a drawer. Later that afternoon, you receive a scroll from Master Liu. Greater than avoid yellow and casual submissions unless formally requested. Palace is reclassifying ceremonial tones. Note red orange, now considered saffron adjacent. Proceed with caution, of course. New category asterisk. Saffron dash adjacent. As if socks weren't already complicated enough. You glance at your own pair, again modest beige, slightly fraying at the heel. They are blissfully unambitious. You give them a small nod of approval. The sun shifts in the window. The breeze carries in the smell of sesame oil from the kitchens. Somewhere outside, a scholar is loudly reciting lines from the Analects, probably at a bird. You return to sorting the rest of the bundle, mostly non-controversial now. A few green pears with pine needle embroidery. One set of ankle guards in summer hemp, slightly itchy looking but surprisingly well stitched. You recognize the maker's tension pattern, someone named Gia, who always knots thread in twos instead of threes. There's comfort in patterns. In knowing that even in a world of rigid hierarchy and terrifying foot symbolism, someone like Gia still adds their own fingerprint to each pair. You smile. It's a small rebellion, a peaceful one. Your final task for the day is to enter these pairs into the sock. Lajor a heavy bamboo-bound book that smells faintly of mildew and ink. Each sock gets its own entry. You must record. Material, stitch count per inch, dye origin, if known. Embroidery subject, intended social category, seasonality, foot alignment. You dip your brush, careful not to smudge, and begin writing slowly, methodically. There's no rush. Somewhere in this tangle of silk and philosophy, you've found your rhythm, and maybe even just a little your peace. You're halfway through the ledger when you feel that familiar tug, the faint sense that something is just a little off. It's the left sock. You don't know how you know. Maybe it's the slight asymmetry in the toe flap, or the fact that the embroidery threads on the inner ankle swirl counterclockwise instead of the usual direction. You hold it up to your own foot for comparison. Always right foot first, naturally, and yes, the sock is definitely left-oriented. Now, that may sound unremarkable to a modern sensibility, but in Han Dynasty philosophy, the left and right were never just directions. They were moral positions. The left foot was aligned with Ren, or humaneness, compassion. The right foot symbolized Lai, or ritual propriety. Every morning, when you slip your socks on in order, you're literally walking a philosophical balance. You remember your first day in the archives, when a junior record keeper came in wearing to write socks each stitched with the character for Lee. He tripped on the entrance step and landed face first into a scroll cart. Someone muttered that the universe had corrected his moral imbalance. It was frankly the highlight of your week. The sock in your hand is a true left, carefully stitched to cradle the outer ankle and arch. Probably made for someone high-ranking, a person expected to demonstrate compassion in all affairs. You flip to the embroidery on the toe, a simple lotus bloom, very appropriate. You check the accompanying sock, it's not there. You rummage through the bundle, lifting pairs and sets aside like pages in a soft, silent book. No match. The left sock has lost its partner. That's a problem. In this archive, no sock is considered fully evaluated unless it exists within a proper pair. It's not just about clothing Confucianism. Values relational harmony. Every sock must have its counterpart. An unpaired sock is more than a storage issue. It's a moral puzzle. You open a side drawer labeled Unresolved Sets and place the lonely left sock there. Nestled beside a right sock with fire-damaged embroidery and a too-short silk ankle wrap. The sock orphanage. That drawer has stories. Like the infamous pair from 3 months ago, one side stitched with peonies, the other with bamboo. The dispute over which side was correct escalated to 3 senior clerks and a short-lived whisper campaign about subversive symbolism. Apparently bamboo implied stubbornness, while peonies hinted at decadence. In the end, they were sent to different departments for their own good. You shake your head, socks. Who knew? At this point, you've even developed your own system. Left socks are sorted with the character for Ren lightly penciled on the inside tag. Right socks, get Lee. When they're evaluated, you erase the marks like a tiny sock-sized moral exam that no one else knows about. Today, your hands move without much thought. Feel the grain, stretch the ankle wrap. The heel curve. Check the toe width. There's an elegance to it. You become something of a sock whisperer. A knock on the beam startles you. It's Wei, the delivery boy, back from the south end of the palace. He's grinning, as usual. Guess what I saw, he says, lowering his voice. 2 cooks arguing over which sock goes on first. One said left, one said right. The head chef said he wears whichever's driest. They started yelling ritual defiler at each other. You snort. At least they're taking it seriously. He holds out a new bundle. From the Ministry of Rites, probably filled with ceremonial weirdness. You accept the bundle with mock reverence and bow low. Thank you, Minister of Footwear Logistics. He bows back, then darts off, presumably to cause more chaos in another corridor. The new bundle is unusually soft, probably cloud-dyed silk. You open it carefully. Inside are 8 pairs of socks, all pale lavender, embroidered with scenes from myth. One shows Nua repairing the sky with colored stones. Another has a dragon curled around the heel. You blink with socks. These are not everyday garments. These are meant for ritual reenactments. Performances of cosmic stories carried out by temple officials or specially designated actors. You spot one with a stitched tiger chasing a pearl across the arch. It's delicate work and not common. Each scene is meant to correspond with a ritual principle. Nua equals repair. Dragon equals ascendance. Tiger equals vigilance. These socks are not just symbolic, they're reminders. Imagine someone slipping these on before a public reading of the Shiji, or standing barefoot inside a ritual circle, slowly drawing on each sock like donning a roll. You sort them gently into their own tray, careful to pair each myth with its proper moment. And then you find something odd. A sock with no myth. It's just a simple lotus, like the unpaired left sock earlier today. You pause. Could it be? You open the unresolved sets drawer again. Pull out the lone lotus sock. Match it to this one. Same thread, same fabric tension. Heel curve identical. You feel it click. They're a pair. You place them together, smoothing them side by side. The image is now complete. Twin lotus blossoms, one slightly open, the other in bud. Growth and potential, you whisper half to yourself. Compassion, and the formality to protect it. You retag them, paired, evaluated, filed. For a moment, you just sit there, not out of fatigue, but from a strange sense of peace. In a world spinning with warlords and taxes and constant decrees, this sock now has its match. And somehow, that feels like victory. The days pass with a rhythm as even and soothing as a well-wrapped ankle. Morning light slants through the paper screens, casting soft lattice shadows over your sorting table. You've grown used to the quiet discipline of this space, where socks arrive folded like whispers and leave imbued with order. Philosophy and just a hint of starch. Today, Master Lu delivers a surprise. New commission, he says, unrolling a scroll with faint ceremonial creases. We're assisting the Bureau of Astrological Garments. You blink? That's real? Oh, very real, he replies, not looking up. They oversee celestial alignments of clothing during court rituals. Everything from star-stitched robes to moon-physopriate footwear. Apparently they're updating their seasonal sock calendar. Of course they are. You set aside your current bundle, a humble lot of house servant ankle wraps, and turn your attention to the items Liu brings out next. They're wrapped in deep blue silk and tied with silk cords, woven to resemble constellations. You untie the first cord and open the bundle. Inside, socks dyed dark indigo, nearly black, stitched with silvery thread and tiny dots and lines. At first glance it looks abstract, then you recognize the Big Dipper. One sock shows it upright, the other tipped toward the horizon. You feel your eyebrows rise. These aren't socks, they're star charts. The Bureau of Astrological Garments, it turns out, takes their role very seriously. Their records state that court officials aligned with the Ministry of Agriculture are to wear constellation-themed garments during solstice ceremonies. Socks included. The belief is that aligning one's feet with celestial patterns strengthens harmony between earth and heaven. Whether anyone ever felt more cosmically attuned in embroidered toe warmers remains an open question. Historians still argue whether these garments were widely worn or remained symbolic ceremonial pieces. But the fact that someone spent several afternoons sewing Sirius into a left heel suggests at least one tailor believed in it. You trace the pattern of the second pair Orion, perhaps, or a more stylized version. Tiny stars stitched in a faint bronze thread. They shimmer when turned. Beautiful, yes, but also practical. These were meant to be visible during indoor candlelit rituals. You picture a robed official stepping forward during a winter solstice reading, lifting the hem of his robe just enough to reveal the stars on his feet. It's both reverent and just a little bit theatrical. Next is a pair stitched with a crescent moon on one toe and a sunburst on the other. These are clearly symbolic of the yin-yang cycle, perfect for an official performing seasonal transitions. There is a faint line of text stitched into the arch of one sock. Asterisk from dusk to dawn, balance walks with you. You exhale slowly. That's actually kind of lovely. You make careful notes in the ledger. Under usage you write, ceremonial, may assist in planetary alignment. It's not technically accurate, but it's poetic, and Master Lu lets it slide. Next comes a curious bundle children's socks again, but in astrological style. It's much smaller, dyed in gentle sky blue with simple constellations stitched in white. Each pair corresponds to one of the 12 earthly branches, the traditional Chinese zodiac. You sort through them. Asterisk a sock with a stitched rat curled near the toe. One with an ox horn near the ankle. A pair with stylized rabbits chasing one another around the arch. Tiny, symbolic, and adorable. Nice. You wonder if they were part of a naming ceremony or a birthday ritual. Or perhaps they were simply gifts for children born under particular signs. Either way, there's a tenderness in the detail. You pair them and place them in a tray lined with padded cotton, resisting the urge to try one on your pinky finger just to see if it fits. You're halfway through the next bundle when something entirely unexpected happens. The lights dim. Not metaphorically, the actual sunlight shifts. Clouds move in fast and heavy, and a strange hush settles across the palace grounds. From the far window, you hear murmurs, footsteps quickening, quiet voices exchanging guesses. You step out and glance toward the courtyard. Several attendants are pointing skyward. You follow their gaze. A solar eclipse. You hadn't checked the almanac, of course. You're just the sock person. But suddenly, everything around you feels deeply connected. Every stitch of fabric, every symbolic toe wrap, tied not only to Confucian hierarchy, but to the rhythm of the cosmos itself. You hurry back inside and pull out the newly sorted eclipse-themed socks. They're here sun on one foot, moon on the other, the poetic pair. You slip them on, just for a moment, just to stand in them as the moon obscures the sun above your head. They're soft, well-fitted, slightly ceremonial feeling, which is to say you're convinced your posture improves by 4%. Outside, the palace stands still in the half-light. Inside, your feet are cosmically aligned. You imagine the Bureau of Astrological Garments would be proud. A few moments later, the sunlight returns, as does Master Liu, holding a small bowl of pickled lotus root. You feel enlightened? He asks without emotion. Just slightly cosmically calibrated, you reply. He nods, hands you a pickle, and walks out again. You return to your seat and remove the socks with care, folding them neatly and setting them back in their proper tray. One final note in the ledger. **** worn briefly during celestial event. Alignment successful. Socks unharmed. ****, you smile. Not bad for a day at the office. The next morning, you return to your sorting bench with a new sense of purpose. You've aligned socks with the stars. You've deciphered left and right as moral opposites. What could possibly be next? The answer arrives in the form of a tightly packed, faintly musty bundle that smells like camphor and faint disappointment. Master Liu drops it on your table like a riddle. Guest house storage, he says. Emergency loan stock. You blink. For what kind of emergency? He shrugs. Someone forgets their ceremonial footwear, or arrives with the wrong seasonal lining. Happens more often than you'd think. Of course, the guest house where minor lords, scholars, and visiting officials are tucked when they visit the capital. A temporary home with temporary comforts, including, it turns out, a cache of backup socks. You unroll the bundle with cautious hands. Inside are 30-odd pairs of mismatched, oddly unremarkable socks. Plain fabrics, neutral colors. Some still have the faint outline of foot sweat. Others have the stiff crispness of unused linen. You are essentially holding the Han Dynasty equivalent of the lost and found box at a mediocre and still. Even these hold stories. You start with a pair in faded gray-blue. The weave is tight, suggesting a northern province, likely somewhere near present-day Shaanxi. One sock is slightly thicker than the other, possibly swapped out during a hasty dressing. The toe stitching has come loose, revealing a makeshift patch made from what looks suspiciously like horsehair thread. It's not elegant, but it's functional. These are travel socks. Historians still argue whether visiting nobles were actually required to switch to approved socks upon entering court grounds, or whether this was more of a symbolic gesture, like washing your hands before a banquet. But clearly, some guests came prepared or unprepared enough to borrow from this humble box. Next, a curious pair, short ankle wraps with a tart, lingering scent. You sniff again. Pickled ginger, odd but unmistakable. You check the inner lining indeed, a faint orange tint where the dye has run. May from ritual storage swings by, sniffs and confirms. Yep, ginger-soaked foot wraps, like Southern custom. Keeps the toes warm during river journeys. She leans closer. Also keeps leeches off, allegedly. You stare at the socks with new respect. These aren't just garments, they're survival tools. You tag them under protective footwear, Southern guest use, and gently set them aside. The next pair is more intriguing still. Dark green, lined with rabbit fur. You raise an eyebrow? These aren't cheap. Fur-lined socks were a luxury, often reserved for winter ceremonies or officials with joint complaints. You find a reed tag tucked inside. Asterisk Joe, chronic cough. You chuckle. That tracks. Someone probably negotiated an extra fur allowance under the guise of medical necessity, which reminds you. You pull out a separate tray labeled asterisk prescribed socks. Yes, in the Han Dynasty. Socks were occasionally prescribed by doctors, not on the take two and call me in the morning sense, but more in the realm of therapeutic textiles. Silk dyed with herbal decoctions. Wool blends soaked in moxa or cinnamon oil. You once encountered a pair tinted faintly purple from crushed perilla leavesa, warming herb for circulation. This current bundle contains several such medicinal marvels. A thin pair of hemp wraps, embroidered with mugwort sprigs, likely meant for warding off foot chills during the monsoon season. Another pair dyed a pale yellow with what appears to be turmeric, likely anti-inflammatory. It's very fashionable among coughing ministers and extremely devoted hypochondriacs. You log them with care. After all, even a foot's well-being was a matter of bureaucratic importance. By mid-afternoon, you discover the real gem of the bundle. A single rolled-up sock. Rough cotton, no decorative stitch, no lining. Just one careful fold and a tag that reads, asterisk you calligrapher's assistant. You hold it for a moment. So simple. Almost meditative. Esterly notices you pausing. About that one, he says, was from the guest house 2 winters ago. He fell asleep while warming inkstones and burned his sandal. Had to borrow from the emergency box. And never returned the other? You ask. Liu shrugs. Some things get left behind. Others get taken as souvenirs. You consider the lone sock in your hands, likely worn through long nights, ink-stained mornings, and the slow, steady rhythm of brushwork. You imagine you, sitting by a small brazier, left foot wrapped in borrowed cotton, right foot bare but warm, writing characters by lamplight, characters no one may read again. You add the sock gently to the unpaired sentimental drawer. At a rare category, used only for garments with stories too quiet to catalog. Finally, you find one last item at the bottom of the emergency bundle. It's not a sock, it's a note, written in careful calligraphy, greater than asterisk to whoever finds this. Thank you for not judging the fur socks. The cough was real. Asterisk greater than. Joe, you smile. Then you do something no one's done in this archive in months. You write a reply. Asterisk, dear Joe, the socks were appreciated and reclassified as medicinal. May your feet be warm and your lungs behave. Sock archivist, you place the note back in the tray, wrap it with twine, and tuck it away. History, after all, is built one footnote at a time. You arrive the next morning to find a scroll waiting on your desk. Weighted down with a small polished pebble, an old archival trick to keep messages from curling into unreadable tubes. The seal is from the Bureau of Public Morality. Of course it is. You break the wax and unroll the message. It's short. Request. Cross-reference sock materials with registered official salary tiers. Focus on excess silks. Begin immediately. Dear at the scroll. The tone says bureaucracy, but the subtext screams suspicion. So now it's begun what you and every sock clerk dread, the compliance audit. The Bureau of Public Morality is basically the Han Dynasty's version of an HR department mixed with a spiritual chaperone. Their job? Make sure no one is living too well. That includes their feet. You sigh and turn to your shelf of salary ledgers. Each civil servant was assigned a salary rank, paid mostly in grain, bolts of cloth, or the occasional tax exemption. Higher ranks got silk socks. Lower ranks, if lucky, got soft hemp or linen. Technically, no one was supposed to wear socks that exceeded their allotted station. But as you well know, toes are prone to ambition. You pull out a tray labeled silk. Suspect origins. It contains socks so fine they could practically float, embroidered with cranes, chrysanthemums, and the occasional auspicious bat. One pair even has a hem stitched in gold, thread actual gold, drawn so thin it's flexible. You remember when it arrived last month? Stuffed between a bundle of housekeeper linen like a guilty secret? You start sorting, cross-referencing, measuring toe width and lining softness against silk quality and dye complexity. Here's a pair marked as belonging to an assistant scribe, grade 6. But the silk is clearly double-twisted. Suzhou weave far too elegant for a salary tier that technically docenti allow anything shinier than a starched cabbage wrap. You note it quietly in your margin. Possible embellishment, or gifted. Historians still argue whether gifts were allowed at all. Technically, Confucian doctrine frowned upon anything that blurred the lines of moral clarity, but in practice, gifting socks was an old gesture of alliance, appreciation, or subtle flattery. A soft power move worn literally below the radar. Next, you come to a bundle tied with a brown cord. Mid-grade hemp wraps with bamboo inner linings. It's perfectly standard for a clerk of middling rank. But the outer toes are delicately embroidered in the shape of stylized clouds. You squint. That pattern is only used in imperial court dances. You open the ledger. The socks belonged to a weather scribe. Ah! Cloud patterns. Perhaps it was a little joke. Or a quiet rebellion. Either way, it's beautifully done. You're right. Technically compliant. Aesthetic interpretation under review. You pause and stretch. Sock audits are oddly exhausting, not physically, but philosophically. How do you measure intention through thread count? Still you persist. The next bundle brings a mystery. A set of linen socks with coarse practical weaves, but each sock is lined with a strip of dyed silk, not the whole foot, just the heel. The silk is stitched inside, invisible from the outside. Now that's clever. You check the records. They belonged to a local tax collector. Tier 5, eligible for silk in outer garments, not underfoot. You make a note, possibly self-stitched comfort modification. Functionally humble, emotionally indulgent. May walks past, peering into your tray. Sock smuggling? You nod hidden heels, it's a thing. She grins. My aunt used to hide dyed thread inside her robe, said the emperor couldn't T-ban joy if he couldn't T-see it. You both laugh softly. The next batch is perhaps the most revealing yet. Children's socks, recorded under the name of a high-ranking official. Silk, of course. With playful embroidery frogs, ducks, peach blossoms, all very sweet. Until you notice the dye, bright crimson, reserved for rituals or elite status wear. Check the ledger. The granddaughter is 5 years old, still too young for official color classifications. You jot a note. Possible overindulgence, perhaps love outweighs decorum. By now, your desk is covered in categorized pairs. Acceptable silk rank-aligned suspect, silk rank inflated clever concealments, heel mods. Inner linings, philosophical violations, improper embroidery themes. The last one includes a very fine pair with stitched dragonflies, a symbol of transformation and change. Reserved, strictly speaking, for poetry gatherings, not funerary occasions, which according to the tag is when these were worn. You add another note, possibly symbolic protest or poor planning. By the end of the day, your fingers are cramped, your inkpot nearly dry, and your brain is dangerously close to dreaming in thread count ratios. But your report is complete. You tie it with hemp cord, no frills, and place it in the compliance satchel. Then, because you know how these things go, you add one final note. In matters of cloth, as in conduct, excess is often a reflection not of corruption, but care. These findings are respectfully offered with the understanding that moral clarity does not always match the comfort of a warm heel. A little poetic flourish just in case anyone in public morality reads footnotes. As you shut the final drawer, the shadows stretch long across the floor. You slip off your own sandals and glance at your socks plain, soft, a little worn at the toes, but honest. You smile. You may not be rich, but your socks are morally unimpeachable. Morning arrives with the subtle scent of osmanthus drifting through the open window. You settle back into your routine, grateful for the quiet after the bureaucratic storm of the compliance audit. But the peace is short-lived, because today you're retasked with something rather unusual. Documenting the sock-related superstitions whispered through the corridors of Han society. You never expected socks to carry so much symbolic baggage, but it turns out they do. The humble sock, you learn, was more than just a foot covering. It was a talisman, a bearer of luck, and a subtle communicator of intent. Your first discovery comes from an old medical text, translated carefully by a well-meaning scholar who included annotations about foot coverings. The text claims that wearing socks with tiger stripes embroidered on the sole could ward off evil spirits during the vulnerable hours just before dawn. Of course, tiger stripes wasn't meant literally, more like jagged lines zigzagging across the fabric, resembling claws or scratches. Historians still argue whether this was a common practice or a simply poetic metaphor for the strength one needed to face the day. You smile, picturing a nervous official slipping into his zigzag socks at 3 a.m., hoping the spirits would be more scared of his feet than of his drafty palace chamber. Then there's the curious case of longevity socks pairs dyed deep red and embroidered with peaches and pine needles. Both symbols of long life in Han iconography, these socks were often gifted to elderly relatives during festivals, meant to wrap their feet in blessings and soft warmth. You've seen a few surviving pairs, their stitches worn, but still vibrant. And it's easy to imagine how comforting they must have felt. One particularly charming tradition involved gifting newlywed couples socks adorned with dragonflies, symbols of transformation and happiness. The socks were never meant to be worn immediately, but kept folded and stored away as a reminder of the couple's new life phase. This is where the line between practical garment and symbolic artifact blurs most deliciously. Of course, not all superstitions were gentle. There was a belief that wearing mismatched socks during the Lunar New Year could confuse household demons and keep them at bay for the entire year. Historians still debate whether this was widespread or limited to specific regions. But you suspect many Han children delighted in this little act of rebellious fashion disguised as piety. Your investigation deepens when May brings you a small, faded booklet titled Tales of Socks and Spirits. Inside, the stories range from amusing to oddly poignant, like the tale of a merchant who believed his worn-out socks had absorbed his luck, prompting him to bury them beneath a pine tree to plant good fortune for the future. Or the scholar who sewed tiny bells onto his socks to ward off the night walker, spirit said to creep silently through hallways. As you read, you notice that many of these superstitions reflect broader cultural concerns about health, protection, and fortune, things everyone worries about. No matter how many dynasties pass, you reach for a pair of socks embroidered with small bells yourself. They're silent now, but you imagine the soft, jingling footsteps of their original wearer moving cautiously through the palace halls at midnight. You jot down a final thought for your ledger. In Han times, socks were more than clothing. They were quiet spells woven into daily life. As dusk falls, you fold the booklet carefully and place it in the archives alongside the ceremonial socks. You feel a soft contentment, the kind that comes from knowing even the smallest items, like socks, hold stories worth telling. Stories that keep the past alive in the most unexpected ways. The day unfolds slowly, and your next task brings you to a surprising corner of the archive's footwear maintenance records. Yes, even socks needed upkeep, and how they were cleaned, repaired, and preserved reveals fascinating insights into Han Dynasty life. You pull out a weathered ledger titled Custodians of Cotton and Silk, Cleaning Protocols and Practices. The entries are surprisingly detailed, almost like a guidebook for sock caretakers. You learn that socks weren't just tossed into water and scrubbed. Instead, they underwent a gentle, multi-step process designed to extend their lifespan and preserve their spiritual significance. First, the washing. The preferred method involves soaking socks in water infused with herbal extracts, such as chrysanthemum petals or mint leaves. These not only freshen the fabric, but were believed to ward off invisible foot ailments. You imagine someone dipping their fingers in a steaming basin, the herbal aroma mingling with the faint scent of earth and sweat. A strangely soothing ritual, really. Once soaked, socks were rinsed carefully in clean water, drawn from nearby springs, sources thought to have purifying properties. There was an art to this step. Too much rubbing, and the delicate silk could fray. Too little, and the sock might retain dirt or odors. Repair was equally meticulous. Mending socks was a craft passed down from generation to generation, with some households maintaining dedicated needleworkers who specialized in invisible stitching. You find notes about thread matching where the color and texture of the repair thread had to perfectly blend with the original material. Even tiny mismatches could signify a lack of care or attentiveness, and sometimes political slights. One curious record notes that sock repairs were occasionally performed using threads imbued with powdered minerals, like cinnabar or malachite. These substances, toxic in large amounts, but harmless in tiny stitches, were thought to provide protection against malevolent spirits or bad luck. You pause and chuckle softly. Who knew your sock repairs might be a secret defense against unseen forces? The ledger also describes the drying process. Socks were never hung in direct sunlight, which could fade the dyes and weaken the fibers. Instead, they were laid flat on woven mats in shaded areas with good airflow, an early version of air drying, but with a certain elegance and mindfulness. This prevented wrinkles and kept the fabric supple. Historians still debate how common such detailed care was among ordinary citizens versus the elite. Some argue these protocols were the privilege of the upper classes, while others suggest that many households, regardless of status, took pride in their textile upkeep. As you continue, you uncover a charming marginal note from a century-old archivist. A well-mended sock is a metaphor for a well-ordered household. You can't help but agree. Finally, the ledger details storage techniques. Socks were folded along precise creases, wrapped in soft silk or paper, and stored in cedar-lined boxes to ward off moths and moisture. Occasionally, sachets of aromatic herbs were tucked inside to preserve freshness and add a subtle fragrance. You close the ledger with a smile, feeling a quiet kinship with the generations of caretakers who tended these small but significant pieces of cloth. Their attentiveness to something as simple as socks speaks volumes about the values woven into Han daily life: respect, patience, and a gentle touch. Stretching your fingers, you prepare to tackle the next archive where your investigation will turn to the cultural rituals surrounding sock gifting. But for now, the scent of chrysanthemum still lingers faintly in the air. The afternoon settles in as you turn your attention to the curious world of sock gifting rituals within Han society. Far from being mere tokens of warmth, socks held deep symbolic weight when exchanged between family, friends, or even political allies. You begin with a slender volume titled Asterisk Gifts and Garments, Social Customs in the Han Court. Asterisk inside, it describes the precise occasions when socks were given and the meanings they conveyed. For instance, gifting socks embroidered with lotus blossoms was a gesture of purity and hope, often presented to young women approaching marriageable age. The lotus, rising pristine from muddy waters, symbolized moral uprightness amid life. This challenges a fitting metaphor for a new bride stepping into a complex social world. You imagine the delicate fingers of a mother wrapping these socks with care, whispering blessings as the daughter slips them on for the first time. You find records of socks being part of official dowries among noble families. These were not just any socks, but carefully crafted pieces reflecting the bride's family status and the groom's expectations. Historians still argue whether dowry socks were more about familial pride or genuine affection, but there's no doubt their craftsmanship was a statement in itself. Then there's the tradition of gifting socks to scholars and poets. Socks embroidered with motifs of cranes and bamboos symbolized longevity and resilience, qualities prized by those who toiled over scrolls deep into the night. Some poems of the era even mention the comfort of well-worn socks as a quiet metaphor for perseverance and solace. You smile, picturing a weary scholar pulling on soft socks after a long day, the fabric like a gentle embrace reminding them to carry on. Interestingly, there are also records of socks being gifted during times of political alliance. High-ranking officials exchanged pairs embroidered with hidden symbols, like intertwined dragons or phoenix feathers, as secret signals of loyalty and trust. You make a note. Asterisk sock diplomacy, the softest handshake in Han politics. You also uncover a curious case where a disgraced official sent socks embroidered with a faded phoenix to the emperor as a plea for mercy. The phoenix, a symbol of rebirth, was a subtle way of saying, "I seek renewal." Historians still debate how often such symbolic gifts affected political decisions, or if they were simply ignored as poetic but futile gestures. The volume closes with a description of seasonal gifting customs. Socks were popular presents during the winter solstice festival, meant to warm both body and spirit as the days grew cold and dark. Families would gather, exchange socks embroidered with auspicious characters, tell stories of the past year, an act that wove community and tradition as tightly as any stitch. You lean back, imagining yourself in one of those cozy Han homes, the room filled with the soft murmur of voices and the comforting weight of hand-wrapped gifts. It strikes you, for all their practical use, socks were truly vessels of connection, carrying warmth in more ways than one. The fading light draws your focus toward the less glamorous but equally fascinating world of ancient Han sock production, the looms, workshops, and the skilled hands behind every stitch. You step into a dusty corner of the archive, filled with sketches, trade receipts, and artisan journals, piecing together the slow, intricate process that transformed raw fibers into those soft, patterned foot coverings. You start with silk, arguably the most coveted sock material of the era. The fabric came from mulberry-fed silkworms, tended with almost reverential care by peasant families. You imagine the gentle buzz of tiny machines' hand-operated looms clacking softly, weaving threads into sheets delicate enough to cradle toes, but sturdy enough to last seasons. One artisaness journal describes the painstaking process of dyeing the silk in natural colors: reds from madder root, blues from indigo leaves, yellows from turmeric. The colors weren't just pretty, they symbolized virtues or social status. However, you find an intriguing note about a secret dye recipe rumored to produce a shimmering silver hue, elusive and highly prized. Historians still debate whether this dye ever truly existed, or if it was just an artisan's daydream. Moving to hemp and linen socks, you find accounts of farmers who spun fibers after long days in the fields, twisting thread by hand into yarn. Their socks, though coarser, were practical and durable, favored by laborers and soldiers alike. You imagine dusty fields and calloused fingers working together, a kind of quiet artistry born from necessity. The archives also reveal the complex division of labor in Han workshops. Specialized workers handled spinning, weaving, dyeing, embroidery, and finally finishing touches like folding and packaging. One account even details a master embroiderer who could complete a pair of socks in under 2 days, weaving intricate patterns while humming traditional tunes. Curiously, you find a letter between two merchants debating the quality of sock shipments. One complains about thread count betrayals and dye fading faster than the emperor's patience. Their humor is timeless, you chuckle, imagining their frustration echoing through the ages. An unexpected fringe tidbit surfaces. Some regions reportedly crafted socks woven with fibers from wild silkworms, producing a rougher texture but reputedly better ventilation and foot health. This practice was regionally limited and often seen as rustic. Yet some modern scholars suggest it influenced later textile developments. As you trace the footsteps of these artisans through time, the workshop noise fades into a gentle hum, and you're left appreciating the silent, slow craft behind every pair. Each sock is a tiny monument to patience, skill, and the everyday magic of turning nature's gifts into comfort. You gather your notes, feeling a soft respect for those anonymous hands that made the fabric of Han daily life one stitch at a time. As twilight deepens, your investigation turns toward the practical challenges the Han faced with sockwear and foot health. Surprisingly complex topic with roots deep in medicine and daily habits. You dive into medical treatises and personal diaries describing the effects of weather, walking habits, and fabric choices on the humble foot. One mainstream fact stands out. Foot ailments were common, especially among those who traveled the Silk Road or worked long hours standing on uneven ground. The ancient medical text treatise on foot care lists various ailments from cracked heels to wind invasion. a poetic term for numbness and pain thought to be caused by exposure to cold air. You picture a weary traveler unwrapping his socks each night, massaging his feet with herbal ointments to soothe aches and fend off what we now call frostbite or fungal infections. Historians still argue whether these treatments were truly effective or more ritualistic, but the care given is undeniable. An unexpected, quirky detail emerges. Some Han remedies involve mixing crushed crocodile dung with herbs to create a sunscreen and healing balm for feet. You suppress a smile, imagining the smell and texture, but acknowledge this strange concoction's place in the era's pharmacopoeia. Socks played a role here too, not just as barriers, but as vehicles for medicinal herbs. Some pairs were soaked in herbal infusions before being worn, allowing the wearer to benefit from slow-release remedies. You can almost feel the faint scent of mugwort and camphor clinging to the fabric, a subtle defense against wind invasion and restless legs. There's also evidence that sock design adapted to medical needs. For example, open-toed socks were sometimes worn to improve circulation, while others featured looser weaves to prevent fungal growth in humid climates. These variations hint at an early awareness of foot health beyond mere comfort. One amusing record recounts an official who commissioned socks embroidered with a single, small hole in the toe believing this would allow bad spirits to escape while keeping the foot mostly warm. Scholars debate whether this was a serious practice or an eccentric superstition. But it's a reminder of how closely health and belief intertwined. You end your research with a quiet reflection on how such simple garments intersected with complex ideas about the body, environment, and healing, a small comfort woven into the daily lives of millions. The evening deepens, and your exploration shifts toward the quieter, less documented aspects of Han sock culture, their role in private, everyday life, and the subtle rituals that surrounded their use within the family. You discover a collection of personal letters and household notes tucked away in the archive's most fragile section. They reveal how socks quietly threaded through daily routines, emotions, and family dynamics. One letter describes a mother carefully knitting socks for her son before he departs on a long journey. She writes about choosing softer silk for comfort and adding a simple embroidered character for protection. You imagine her sitting by a dim lamp, the soft click of needles echoing through the quiet room, each stitch infused with hope and worry. Another note records a young wife's reflections on receiving socks from her mother-in-law, just gifts, but symbols of acceptance and care within a new household. The socks were both practical and emotional, small tokens easing the awkwardness of unfamiliar surroundings. You find a diary entry where a scholar mentions the calming effect of putting on clean socks after a stressful day. It's a tiny, almost invisible act of self-care, but one that brings a sense of order and peace, like folding the edges of a chaotic day into neat corners. Curiously, the records hint at informal sock exchanges among friends and neighbors during festivals, a gentle reminder of social bonds in a world without smartphones or social media. Socks were practical, but also tokens of kindness and connection, worn to feel the warmth of friendship. Historians still argue how widespread these intimate sock rituals were beyond elite circles. But the evidence suggests that no matter one's social rank, socks carried quiet meaning at the heart of Han life. You smile, realizing that socks, often overlooked in grand histories, were in fact intimate companions, soft witnesses to love, worry, and the rhythms of ordinary days. The pages close softly under your fingers. Outside, the sky fades to a deep indigo. The past, woven through silk and hemp, lingers gently in the quiet room. You remain seated for a while longer, surrounded by the quiet comfort of old pages and faint memories. The archive room has grown darker now, save for the soft golden glow of the reading lamp beside you. Shadows stretch gently across the floor, slow and unhurried, like time itself choosing to rest. Your thoughts drift not just through the Han Dynasty, but across all the centuries that separate you from those lives long past. Strange to think how something as simple as a sock could hold such quiet significance. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine a mother's hands brushing against the silk, testing its smoothness before threading the needle. A newlywed tucking a gifted pair into the corner of a modest wooden chest. A scholar setting aside his brush, rubbing his weary feet before slipping into soft, clean socks at the end of a long day. These aren't the grand stories of conquest or empire. There are no armies, no declarations, no thrones. And yet, in their own way, these quiet rituals matter just as deeply, perhaps even more. They remind us that history is not only found in what was written in stone, but also in what was whispered between stitches. In the creases of fabric warmed by human touch, you let your fingers trail across the last letter, its ink faded, but still legible. There's something deeply calming about the idea that even the smallest, most mundane objects like a pair of socks could carry such emotional weight. Protection, acceptance, rest, love, outside. The wind rustles faintly through bamboo leaves. The past is quiet now, no longer a mystery to chase, but a gentle companion sitting beside you in the stillness. You rise slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile order of things. One last glance over your shoulder, and then you begin walking down the corridor. Your footsteps are soft. The walls echo faintly, but nothing interrupts the peace that has settled around you like a light blanket. As you step outside, the night air brushes gently across your face. It carries no urgency, only the cool stillness of a world that is wound down for the day. Above you, the stars blink through the haze, ancient and unbothered. Their light traveling thousands of years just to be noticed in this quiet moment. And you realize perhaps the deepest parts of history are not meant to be understood quickly or loudly, but slowly, like slipping into a warm pair of socks after a long, chaotic day. They aren't always meant to wake us up. Sometimes they're here to help us drift off, to comfort us, to lull us into reflection, and to remind us that beneath the great waves of time are always small, soft ripples worth listening to. You exhale slowly. Another story ends. Another night begins. If you found this journey gentle and meaningful, Consider subscribing to explore more forgotten fragments of history, stories that may not shout, but speak deeply and quietly to the soul. Wishing you a peaceful night. Thank you for listening. See you in a dream, in another corner of history.